And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation forecast now for Friday morning. Watch for IFR concerns across the southwestern Capes and a large part of Bristol Bay. Marginal concerns will push a little bit further north into Etoll and Strait, out toward the southern extent of St. Lawrence Island and out toward St. Matthew, where we pick up IFR once again, wrapping into low pressure here across the central and western Bering. Marginal weather will start to move in across the central and eastern chain. A little bit of a break as you move across the Alaska Peninsula Pacific waters and over KUAC Island, with IFR spreading into southern parts of southeast. Snows expected here with IFR across the extreme southern sections, including Ketchikan, Cake, and KUAC, and probably areas into the Dixon entrance for the time being. As we get into the afternoon, that area will diminish. Some improvements are expected with hit and miss marginal across the Gulf. We'll really get back into it as we get into southwestern Alaska with widespread IFR moving in during the afternoon for Gamble and Savunga out towards St. Matthew, Macoriac, and down to southwestern Alaska and the Capes. Probably moving very close to, but not over, Bethel during the afternoon, and then working its way up the valleys toward Lake Iliamna, Dillingham, and King Salmon, kind of hit and miss with everywhere on the Alaska Peninsula really experiencing at least marginal concerns throughout the day. Adak and Atka will be up and down. South Central, the interior, the North Slope, the West Coast, primarily okay for your Friday afternoon, but that's gradually going to change as we get into the weekend, with IFR setting up across St. Lawrence Island and then back into the Yukon Delta and the Kuskokwim, of course. Bethel goes down. It looks like King Salmon and Dillingham and Kodiak go down, and many areas across south and west will see improving weather from west to east as we go through your Saturday afternoon. Southeast looks to be VFR as we get into Saturday morning, but remember, we're going to be talking about turbulence in a minute. Outflow conditions will be expected with a lot of that cold air draining out across coastal locations, and some of that's also moving across the central and western parts of the Seward Peninsula and the Yukon Valley there, so plan on some changes as we go. For Saturday afternoon, IFR sets into Nome, Unalakleet probably going down at least for a time during the day. Gamble and Savunga back to marginal. Macoriac and westward toward St. Paul, St. George, all the way down toward Nikolsky and Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, looking at IFR by Saturday afternoon, and another wave coming in behind that with marginal concerns across the western chain and hit and miss around Cordova and probably some of the coastal areas of southeast as we get into the afternoon. Here's your pass conditions in detail now for Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, and really most of our passes. High pressure is firmly in charge, so caveat would be isolated areas of low-level stratus or maybe some ice fog in the region. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be mainly okay. Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass should all be VFR for the most part. And as we get out toward Mentasta Pass, again, looking like that'll be okay. Tanita Pass and Portage Pass at this point look to be okay. Remember, though, we're dealing with portage winds, or not portage winds, outflow winds around many areas that are prone to those gap flows when we have substantial high pressure in the wintertime. So again, if you're flying through those known tricky spots, keep that in mind. VFR is not going to be the whole story here. Chilkoot and White Pass, certainly some of the areas that we're going to see some gusty winds in the region, and VFR is expected there. Freezing levels show that low pressure in the west is pulling in a lot of warm and wet air across the southern parts of the Bering. We're looking at 2, 4, and even 6,000 foot levels coming up across Adak, eastward toward Nikolsky and Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Not quite to the Alaska Peninsula just yet. The surface freezing lines being nudged northward to St. Matthew, and then south of Kodiak all the way across the southern outer coast with a 2,000 foot level there creeping in on the Dixon entrance of southeast. Everywhere else sub-freezing, of course. Icing potential growing a little bit around Kodiak tomorrow. It looks like the levels coming up to about 3,000 feet and higher for some considerable moderate, especially across the southern half of the island. Elsewhere up the west and southwestern coast, isolated moderate, generally between about 8 and 3,000 feet. Southern parts of southeast looking at increased icing potential, isolated moderate, but below 10,000 feet. The jet stream is showing some signs of change. That's good news if you're tired of the cold. High pressure across the west coast there, pushing northward there, deepening trough in the west. Wind speeds on that 100 to 120 knots with high pressure over the central Pacific. A stronger westerly flow across the North Gulf, 100 to 120 knots. And again, that's all flowing that cold air into the Pacific Northwest and the western U.S. High pressure across the North Slope dragging in colder northerly flow for the interior, so it will stay cold for the meantime. Low pressure in the west keeps that westerly flow moving across the west coast and across the Gulf of Alaska. No big change at 3,000 feet. Strong east to westerly flow, though, across the Yukon Valley to the west is notable, though. 40 to 50 knots there at that level produces a chance for considerable moderate to isolated severe turbulence below 4 to 5,000 feet in that region and chop for most of southeast and the Aleutians and the peninsula.